Peace and love and greetings. My name is Brian Knowles. I'm the manager of the School District's Office of African, African American, Latino, Holocaust, and Gender Studies. My office has been in existence for over 27 years here in the local school district of Palm Beach County. It has led some critical work around reforming teaching and learning by creating an educational foundation where all students are affirmed and validated. This is accomplished through the three following steps: on normalizing the teaching and the histories and incorporating the histories of all cultures and students within the classroom. Also, curriculum transformation, where all students can develop an understanding of the experiences, the values, and perspectives of different racial, cultural, ethnic, religious, and gender groups. And it is critical that all students can see themselves in a positive light and engage in curriculum instruction where their culture is represented. It is also equally as important that students can develop an understanding of each other so we can eradicate racism and discrimination in this country and in our society. And also to support educators in implementing pedagogical strategies that address the cultural norms and learning preferences of all students or diverse student population. So we'd like to welcome you, first of all, to the 27th annual, yes, I said it, the 27th annual African American and Caribbean Studies Summer Institute. Our theme this year is Marathon Towards Educational Transformation, a reimagining education by affirming and centering Black history and culture. The aim is to help participants identify educational practices rooted in Afrocentric perspectives and values. The long-term objective is transforming education by placing Black history and culture at the center of school climate, curriculum, and pedagogy. We have practice that has shown evidence that Black students increase engagement, and it also promotes academic success and fosters social, emotional development of Black students. So we thank you all for joining us today, and I have the honor and privilege to introduce one of the most powerful voices in our country, and possibly in our world, around these topics, around Afrocentric perspectives, and making sure that we can cultivate the gifts that are innate to all of our Black students in the classroom. We have Dr. Gholnecsar Muhammad, who is an associate professor of language and literacy at Georgia State University. She also serves as a director at the GSU Urban Literacy Collaborative Clinic, and she studies Black historical excellence within educational communities with goals of reframing curriculum and instruction. Dr. Muhammad's scholarship has appeared in leading educational journals and books. Some of her recognition includes the 2014 recipient of the National Council of Teachers of English, Promising Teacher New Researcher Award, and also the 2018 UIC College Education Researcher of the Year, amongst many more awards. Also, she works with teachers, leaders, and parents and young people across the United States, South Africa, across the whole diaspora, and across the whole world, in best practices in culturally and historically responsive instruction. That's a whole new dynamic. Sometimes we talk about culturally responsive education, but historically responsive education is a new dynamic that we need to really focus on, a new component that we need to bring to the table. Also, she is the author of a dope and amazing book, a best-selling Cultivating Genius, an equity framework for culturally and historically responsive literacy. Once again, our bring to the table and our bring to the 27th annual African American and Caribbean Studies Summer Institute, Dr. Gholdy Muhammad. Take it away, sis.
Thank you, brother. Thank you for all the work that you do for our communities, for our schools, for our people. Hello, everyone. Greetings. I'm so happy to be with you and to share a quick presentation on this idea of equity and anti-racism and what it looks like in a model of what I call culturally and historically responsive literacy, which I also call culturally and historically responsive education. So I want to begin here by showing this beautiful image of children in 1939 reading in Montgomery, Alabama. I always like to start with something beautifully compelling. Something that we must unearth to remind us of the genius and the joy of our students, because our students are genius. I entitled my book Cultivating Genius because our youth are indeed genius. I have been working with teachers. This is maybe my 18th year in education, And I have been training teachers on culturally and historically responsive education for the last 10 years. And I would ask teachers who struggle, particularly teaching Black and Brown youth, and even more specifically, they struggle with teaching Black children. I would ask them one simple question. Tell me about your Black students. See, it was with Black students who we failed to get it right with the most. It was with Black students where the test scores were lowest oftentimes. It's with Black people in society that we fail the most when it comes to incarceration, injustice, healthcare, and all these other aspects. And so, for the group of teachers who were struggling to educate Black children in all of their diversity, I said one question: tell me about your Black students so I can tell you how to help teach them better. And then the teachers would tell me they're struggling. And I would say, no, start again. And they would say things like they're unmotivated. And I would say, no, start again. And they would say things like they have 20% proficiency. And I would say, no, start again. And they would say things like, they can't read. They're not invested in their learning. They're tier 2, tier 3 kids. And again and again. And I would say, no, start again. And then I would ask them, tell me about your own sons and daughters. And magically, the narrative became positive. But why didn't Black children have that same positive narrative starting about them? See, we're not going to start the story off with what the system has caused them to be, what the curriculum has caused them to be, what oppression has caused, or what you think has caused them to be. We're not going to start the story off with anything but genius, because our students are geniuses already in them when they come to you. You only need to be the cultivator of the genius. Our students can make something out of nothing. They are genius. They can see something where no one else can see it. That's genius. They can make you smile when you're having a bad day. That's genius. Their linguistic practices are genius. The way they make sense of the world is genius. And to say anything but genius is very inhumane. Because when we start the story off with anything but genius, it robs our students of their dignity. It breaks their spirit. Because stories matter, as Chimamanda Adichie says. It can dispossess a group of people, or it can empower or humanize them. And when we show somebody what they are over and over and over again, that's who they will become. You show them struggling again and again, and they may become struggling. But most of all, your curriculum, your pedagogy may struggle. But if you see them as geniuses, guess what? Your pedagogy will show up every time as genius. I want you to consider these two statements. In our district, as an example, hypothetically, we have 20% of literacy proficiency among our Black students. Or let's say we have literacy curriculum that responds to 20% of our Black students. Now, which one needs remediation? Which one needs intervention? Is it the student, or is it the curriculum? See, historically, we have gone straight to the child, instead of going to the system, instead of going to the curriculum that was never designed for that child in the first place. See, I do a couple of things for a living. I've been a school board president. I've been a school teacher. I've been a reading specialist and coach. I've been a school district administrator over curriculum and instruction. And currently I rewrite the standards, the Common Core standards, and I do some revision of schools curriculum. But I audit the curriculum and I know the problems with it. The curriculum was never designed for Black children. And we wonder why they don't show up and respond to the same curriculum. See, our stories have always started with genius. From days of Timbuktu in West Africa and Mali, we made more money off of the sale of books than any other trade. That's genius. When folks tried to come over and colonize and take over, we protected our loved ones, and then we protected our sources of knowledge, our books. Genius. We would use hair braiding to braid maps into young women's and girls' hair during days of enslavement to signify direction toward freedom. That's mathematics. That's semiotics. That's genius. We would use songs and spirituals and hymns like the song Go Down Moses. And when you heard that song being sung, you knew that Sister Harriet Tubman was nearby. And if you desired freedom for yourself, you could have it. That is genius, to create something so communicative, so literary, so secretive during days of American terrorism. That's genius. See, I noticed that Black folks did not start the story off with at risk. They didn't say we are at risk. We didn't say we are unmotivated. We are struggling. We said we are genius. We wrote about our genius. We wrote about stimulating and fostering the genius of our race and cultivating our intellectual faculties and educating and cultivating ourselves. See, even in the 1800s and early 1900s, we knew, despite of being stolen from our land, despite of being stripped from our names, our identities, our language practices, we even showed up every time and said, we are genius. We even entitled our books with genius, like this one, The Black Man and His Genius, 1863. We're letting you know who we are. Baba Asa Hilliard said that I have never encountered any child across any group who was not a genius. And there is no mystery on how to teach Black children and other children. The first thing you do is you humanize your practices and your minds and your hearts. You treat them as human beings. The second thing you do is love them. It is that simple. And those who I work with, teachers across the country and the world who struggle the most, they struggle with that first. And our story started with joy. See, when you entered Black spaces for learning, like schools and Black literary societies and book clubs and our own makeshift learning spaces, when you came into our spaces and our schools to learn, our ancestors said this: when you read, which was synonymous with education and learning, you will visit countries and converse with anyone good and great without ever meeting them, without ever getting onto transportation. They said, this is what our schools can do for you. When you read and learn, you will view elegance and aesthetics and the beauty of the world. Our ancestors said that when you read and learn, you will ascend. See, for us, education was directly linked to ascension, to come up higher than where you were. That is the purpose of education in Black communities. And our ancestors said that when you read and learn in our schools and spaces, you will enkindle the most sublime emotions that can animate the human soul. That is genius, and that is joy. So how did we get here, dear educators? Using words like minority. No one is minor. I hear words like minority in school districts with 85% or more Black and brown students. Who is the minority? White children. Why don't you call them minor? Why is it just us? Using words like at risk and thug and confrontational and saying that they can't read, they can read you up and down. They know your love. And if you love them, that's reading. That's a different kind of reading, but it's reading. To say that a child cannot read, you do not sound like a professional if you ever use that word. See, my ENT doctor doesn't say Gholdy can't breathe. She says she struggles breathing at night through her nose. She's talking like a professional. She's not saying she can't breathe. Calling students struggling without addressing the struggling of the system is very problematic. How did we get here, dear educators? Let me give you a quick overview. See, there was an erasure of Black genius and joy in teacher education. When I was becoming a teacher, I was learning from the likes of Vygotsky and Piaget and John Dewey and Maslow, who never centered Black genius in their models and theories. Like the zones of proximal development, if you do not center genius and joy, I do not care for it. Or I don't certainly care for it alone. How is that going to help me specify the needs of Black children? See, I did not learn from Mary McLeod Bethune, who opened her own school for Black girls in Florida, who in her last will and testament taught us everything we need to know about education. I did not learn from Carter G. Woodson, who gives us what we call multiculturalism. I did not learn from Claire Muhammad, who gives us what we call today homeschooling. I did not learn from W.E.B. Du Bois, who gives us what we call today identity-centered learning, or Elizabeth Flood or Anna Julia Cooper, who gave us intersectionality. See, these folks were talking about educating every single child, not just Black children even. They were about the liberation of all. And then in the 1850s, how did we get here? We had something called the measuring rod of textbook selection. As a historical researcher, I study moments in our history like this, where Mildred Lewis Rutherford said that this is the guidebook for how you select curriculum in U.S. public schools. She says, if it shows the Black person, the Negro, as genius, reject the book. Do we ever wonder why we never get a whole unit plan on Black genius or Black joy? It's always about struggle or pain of Black people, because this is what she told us to do in 1850. She says, select the book that shows the Black person as joyful only as slaves, because Black people, she says, were happy. They liked being slaves. That's what she says in her writings. She says, reject the book as my arrow is pointing that speaks to the slaveholder of the South as cruel and unjust. See, when you bring such foolishness into this history, and you've had publishing companies take on her agenda and her message, what happens is that you see this stuff still show up today. You have an erasure of truth. You have an erasure of Black genius, and you have a erasure of joy. And so when you see this in curriculum, this is where it started. And then if I can give you one more point of historical significance, you have the first textbook for teaching children how to read. This was called the New England Primer, and it was published in Boston in the United States around 1638. Now, when I studied this book centers whiteness, white thought, white representation, white language, neglecting people of color. There are more animals in the book than there are people of color. 1638. The book also lacks social justice and identity meaning making. It was only printed in the English language, and it only centered the cultivation of skills. My dear educator, to teach skills that are devoid and decontextualized of students' lives, of their identities, of their race, of their gender, of the world, and all the problems in it is not genius. It's basic when you do that. That's just preparing them to take a test. And when we study where we are today, how much have we changed? When I look at those problems and look at Mildred Rutherford's work, I see it in our Common Core state standards. I see it in our curriculum that our schools adopt. I see it in our state assessments. I study state assessments and those sample test items. I see it in our teacher evaluation, like the Danielson, who does not measure teachers' ability to teach identity and social political consciousness, but only skills. I see it in teacher evaluation. So from the 1600s to 2021, where is the genius and where is the joy? How much have we really changed? And I see it where I am in Georgia. These are the standards for excellence for kindergarten students. As soon as they come into our schools, they learn more whiteness. And this is Mildred Rutherford's dream come true. She says she wants slaveholders to be seen as loving and kind and beautiful. And look what we have in the standards. We're not critiquing Columbus and George Washington and those who have oppressed. Where are the women? Where are the Black people? Where are Latinx people? Where are Indigenous Peoples Day? Where's Juneteenth? Even the bald eagle has more respect in the state standards than people of color. See, when we have this sort of agenda to erase Blackness, Black thought, we see it show up in our lessons, in our standards. And we see it show up in our texts. If we take a look, we still have more animals in books than collective children of color. We still have curriculum and texts where our students cannot see who they are, who they're not, and who they can become. Their mirrors are cracked. Their mirrors are smaller. If our curriculum and texts are like mirrors of themselves where they can see themselves manifested in varied and beautiful ways, why are their mirrors so small and cracked? And this is why children don't leave knowing each other and knowing themselves. And we see this stuff show up in our schools, from having slavery games to opt-out forms of Black History Month, to having students write funny captions under pictures of Black enslaved women who were on their menstrual cycles, who were raped and abused and had to bear oppressors' children. This is who we find comical. Listen, if I had any, and teachers keep their jobs. If folks had somebody write a funny caption under a concentration camp, they wouldn't even have the words to come out their mouths before they would be fired. But for some reason, people do this to Black people, and it is allowed. This is what I'm disrupting in my work. So when there is an erasure of people's humanity in society, it's going to be an erasure in schools. Anytime people get in trouble, teachers, for teaching Breonna Taylor's name and not Anne Frank, we got a problem with our hearts, with the soul of this nation. Because if all lives really matter, why do you get in trouble for teaching Breonna Taylor? Her life mattered just as much as Anne Frank. I loved Anne Frank and I love Breonna Taylor. They both did not deserve the oppression that happened to them. But for some reason, we're not allowed to teach and have any specificity of Black women's oppressions and pains. And so I asked myself, when are we have enough genius in this world? We have enough research. We have enough proof of the killings, of the deaths, of the erasure. Where are the educational reparations, and when will a better day come? So my work is in response to the absence of Blackness being in our standards, our curriculum, our teacher evaluation, our state assessments, absent of our histories, our identities, our liberation. And so because of this, I argue that it's a time for a new way forward, one that is grounded in Blackness. We have used models from Europe for too long. We have used models of whiteness for too long. It has not changed where we are. And so this is why we need a better way. And this is where my book comes in. I study Blackness and Black literary societies and Black education to understand, well, what did our people do? Because I learned that they had higher and more advanced and elevated learning standards than we have in 2021. And I'm going to repeat that. They had higher and stronger and more rigorous learning standards in the 1800s than we have in 2021. And so I studied literary societies because these were spaces of mathematical learning, science, history, language. They were book clubs that were abolitionists in their efforts, where they read and enjoyed themselves, enjoyed literature, enjoyed learning, but they were abolitionists in their pursuits of trying and working to make the world better and more anti-racist. And they had membership that grew and grew, and they started in 1828 by young Black males. And they gave us this beautiful gift. They left us with the most precious thing that anybody could leave a nation, a world. They left us with a model for education, because when you educate the children better, you have a better and more just society, because those folks are going to grow up and be lawmakers, be teachers, be doctors, be all these beautiful things that we need in the world. They're going to be all the workers around us. And if they have knowledge of these 5 things, they're going to be more humane humans. So our ancestors gave us 5 pursuits. They used the word pursuits. They did not use the word standard. A standard comes from whiteness as a word. I'm learning the standard to pass a test, but our ancestor says we're not trapped in smallness. We are about ascension. We ascend. So we are going to use the word pursuits. A pursuit means I'm learning this, yes, to pass a test and to graduate, but for my life, for self-determination and self-reliance and self-empowerment. And so they said that every time you write a lesson plan or a unit plan, you think about identity. How will it help your child to learn something about themselves and others? Skills, what proficiencies or Common Core standards are you teaching? Intellect, what are your students becoming smarter about intellectually with people, places, and things? Citing textual evidence or fluency are not intellectual goals. Those are connected to skills. They said criticality. How will your curriculum and instruction help students to name, understand, disrupt oppression like racism, sexism, homophobia, anti-ageism, anti-classism, and things like that? That helps students to figure out the oppressions, the systemic problems of the world and address them and disrupt them. And the fifth pursuit is joy. How is your learning elevating beauty and humanity and telling the truth where students can see themselves represented in honest, truthful, different, joyful, beautiful ways? And collectively, you're teaching the whole child when you teach these 5 pursuits. And to teach the 5 pursuits, I suggest that you layer text. You take an anchor text and you layer it with short, powerful, multimodal, print and non-print. So if I was teaching about apartheid in South Africa, I'm not going to start with the oppressors and what they have done. I'm going to start with the beauty of South Africans and the genius of them. And then I'm going to layer it with sound, like the national anthem. I'm going to layer it with a decolonization map of Africa. I'm going to layer it with a video about apartheid because collectively now I have the makings and the plan of action to actually teach these 5 pursuits. Now let me show you what they look like. This comes from the book Buzzing with Questions. I want to start with our parents who are our partners with this work and what they can do at home. You can take quick read alouds and ask your child 5 questions that's connected to each of these 5 pursuits. So this is Buzzing with Questions, a book about the zoologist born in 1867, Charles Henry Turner. Identity. What do you want to learn more about, dear child? Skills. Write out 5 questions you have about the world. Intellectualism. Who is Charles Henry Turner? Criticality. Why do we need to learn more about Black male scientists and zoologists? This gets at representation. And joy. What gives you happiness when you learn about it? All connected to the theme of the book. This is a book because you matter. For identity, we can ask a child, how do you matter? Skills, what is matter when it comes to science skills? Intellectualism, what does it mean to matter? Criticality, what do you do when somebody makes you feel like you don't matter? So now that power and disruption is making sure you don't hurt or oppress yourself by telling yourself negative things. And joy, what do you love best about yourself? And why should those things make you smile? Every child needs to be able to answer these questions. If we move to pre-K or through 2nd grade, this is a book of Brown Bear, What Do You See? The student will read with 80% accuracy. They will see themselves positively for identity. They will learn the concept of self-perception for intellect. And why should we think in positive ways about people who are different? Why is it important of how we perceive each other? We don't want to have a lack of knowledge or stereotypes about each other. And joy, students will learn the beauty in differences. This is an example of students learning how to write their names in kindergarten. But for identity, students will learn the meanings of their names, how their names are special to themselves and to their families. They will learn about different naming traditions across different cultures and how some names are treated differently for criticality and unfairly in society. And they will be able to talk about the joyful memories associated with their names. Now, this is now in the classroom. So as a family connection, I want the parents and their children to talk about how names are given in our family. And this comes from The Proudest Blue. It happens to be Ramadan right now, where students will learn about the hijab and develop essential questions about Islamic culture for social studies. They can name what they like to wear that makes them feel special for identity. And they'll learn how ignorance is connected to being hateful or mean, like the character in the book. And how can color give us joy, like the color blue? And as a family, what clothing is special or important to our culture? And this is a math kindergarten unit on how to add and subtract by studying a double-decker bus. What is a double-decker bus? Students will think about the modes of transportation they have experienced in society, in just living. They'll learn how different modes of transportation are better for the environment, for breathing, for air quality, for criticality. And they had to virtually move their seat on the bus because we taught this during the pandemic. And as a family, what modes of transportation do we see in our community? And if we move to older grades, like grades 3 through 5, this was a fourth grade unit on Indigenous Peoples Day, where students learn about Indigenous people for identity and the genius and joy of different cultures who are indigenous to this country. They learn about the importance of naming holidays that reflect truth and justice and anti-oppression, and how to read maps, how to talk about the land. This is just a unit on Black joy, where they learn about Black Hikers Week and how to quantify trail maps for fifth graders. They learn if they like to hike and be outdoors and the importance of seeing people of color in outdoor spaces and how nature can elevate one's happiness. And finally, another example of teaching students about what is a blueprint and what is your life's blueprint, as Dr. King has taught us, where they learn different tools for measurements and the factors that can keep you from meeting your life's blueprint or your life's goals. And if we move to middle grades, this is one on freedom schools and of Mississippi. It's a part of our history that we don't really teach in K-8 education. So students will study primary source documents and learn the history of freedom schools and how they see their own lives represented in their school's curriculum. They will learn about activism and self-determination and how Black people experience joy in freedom schools, like when they started every day with the freedom song. So as a family, students will think about, what is my family's freedom playlist if they had to come up with one? This is a unit on seventh grade, how to measure and calculate distance, and students will discover their own traveling identities. If they had to pack a bag with their families for a road trip, where would they go for joy? They learned the history and the facts of the Green Book and the racial violence that Black people experienced in the 40s and 50s. As a family, they talked about where they have been and where they want to go, and do we still need a Green Book today? And finally, for high school grades, this is a computer science unit on creating algorithms of calculating the cost of credit. See, people will tell me that we cannot do culturally responsive work in computer science and mathematics and science in high school. That's simply just not true. Students learned that credit scores were invented in the 1950s for intellect. They got to discover, do I need a credit score for my future financial life? And they had to find a dream college, a dream school, a dream house, a dream car. Where might I need a credit score, like for a loan? And so they also studied the disparities of credit scores today. Why do some people have higher credit scores and why do some have lower? This is a Spanish world language unit on time. Look how, if I've only taught students through the textbook on how to speak in Spanish, look at all they would miss out on. They would not discover their own relationship with time for identity, how time is measured and perceived across communities of colors, for how time is measured and perceived across communities of color for intellect. They would not study European dominations of time for criticality, and how they spend their time for joy. And finally, this is a unit where I just saw this beautiful map of fabrics in the continent of Africa. And I connected it to geometry in a 10th grade high school unit where students will learn geometric transformations and symmetry. They'll learn about the diverse fabrics across the continent of Africa and how Africans use textiles to sustain their economy, especially after being colonized. They'll learn about the different fabrics and clothing that is especially important to their own cultures, and the colors and lines of symmetry that they like to wear for their own happiness. And so, as I conclude, these are questions that I recommend for teachers to ask themselves as they're either writing pedagogy or starting a fresh unit or lesson for their students, or as you are refining the curriculum that you have in front of you. First, asking purpose. Out of all the things in the world, why are you teaching this? We must know authentic purpose, and it must go beyond because it's in the curriculum or in the standards. We must then ask, how does it connect to identity, to skills, to intellectualism, and to criticality? You should be able to name those goals very clearly. What text will you layer to support the 5 pursuits? Are you energized about teaching it? Number 7, energy is important because you want students to feel excited in the learning. Number 8, how will you make it impossible for your students to fail? Through differentiation and accommodations. And then how will you change as a result? We're not here to save children. Children are also here to save us. We are trying to become better in the process of teaching. And how will you spread and amplify joy in your learning? We need joy more than ever. Teachers need joy more than ever because you cannot give something that you do not have. And if you include the teaching about people of color and indigenous people and Black people, you must start with our genius and our joy first. And then finally, how will this instruction help students to create social change in their community? That is at the root of culturally and historically responsive education. And so when you see 20% proficiency, it's not surprising to me because when you look at across all 5 of these pursuits, we are only teaching one. We're only operating at a 20% proficiency instead of 100%. You bring in all 5 of these, you might have closer to 100% proficiency in our schools. And remember, to do this, we must unearth and we must humanize. We must go and dig into the earth to find out the histories, the stories, the identities that we have failed to teach our children. See, when I was learning about Black history and Black literary societies, I was in love with our ancestors because they left us with such beauty and such genius. But at the same time, I was angry. I was angry because I asked myself, why didn't anyone teach me this in K-12, in undergraduate? Why did they leave this out? Because folks like Mildred Lewis Rutherford told them to leave it out, and no one disrupted her message. And so if we're going to teach in culturally and historically responsive ways, you must unearth genius and joy for the students. Toward humanizing practices, we must be more human. I don't think that there's any coincidence that the word human is connected to the word earth. And so as you are discovering out of all the things in the world, what should you teach your children? Teach them about Black farmers at a conservation meeting, about soil. Bring in science, bring in history, bring in mathematics. Because when you look at the work this way, all the content areas are humanities. It's not just ELA and social studies. And I remind you and I remind myself to be the genius that we need in the world. And with that, I want to conclude. And I hope that you support this work. If you want to know more about cultivating genius, The book is available. I'm also available via email and social media. Thank you.
Sis, that was absolutely incredible. When you were starting off, I know we have a Q&A session that we're going to dive into right now. I was trying to kind of keep notes and try to alter some of the questions that I was going to ask, and I just kind of lost track. And I was like, I can't keep notes because I want to pay attention to what you're saying. In addition to, you were dropping so many gems and jewels within that, that was just like kind of impossible to kind of capture all of that. So I thank you. And just like I said, it's our privilege and honor that you're here to kind of help us facilitate this and really move this work forward. So I thank you so much, sis. And appreciation is beyond what I can even articulate right now. So thank you. So you said a lot of things in that presentation, and there's a lot of more than valuable information that is contained within your book, Cultivating Genes. And one of those things that you brought up in there, when we talk about deficit language, looking at Black children in a deficit space and looking at Black history in a deficit space. One of the things that my team does throughout our school district is that we definitely promote stepping outside of that parameters of looking at Black history and culture within the parameters of oppression, right? And understanding that our history goes beyond that. And even when we teach about oppression, that we must understand that despite all of our oppression, how do we create passageways? How do we maintain our identity? How do we display resilience and perseverance against all of that? But the biggest thing is that our history spans to the very beginning of human civilization and humanity. And there are so many amazing things that we have done and contributed, and not only contributed to, but created throughout our society that we have today that has come from Black people, right? Mm-hmm. And a lot of this stuff stemmed from before there was colonialism, imperialism, or that ugly institution that we know as racism, right? Mm-hmm. So one of the things that you place an emphasis on in your book is cultivating and developing, not giving, but cultivating and developing in what I call indigenous agency. The power, the genius, the brilliance, and the beauty that is already naturally within Black children. In opposition to the concept that, educators should empower our students, schools should empower students, right? So you're saying that, first of all, our students have that power. We just need to help them identify, and we need to create an environment that is conducive to them developing that power. Exactly. As an institution, how do we create that dispositional shift that needs to change that narrative, right? And what steps would you suggest for each of the following positions: as a school-based leader, as a classroom teacher or an educator, or school support staff? How do we change that narrative?
Yeah. So, we first have to define institution, right? If I start at the National Institution of Education through the Department of Education, it's very clear to me what the U.S. Secretary of Education needs to do. It always has been. And it baffles me that we have not changed. We have just put fresh coats of paint on the same structure that is falling apart, that has never served all children well. It's almost like, as a nation, we want Black and brown children to fail. Because when you think of the whole nation, the whole nation can provide an absolutely free, conscious level, culturally and historically responsive curriculum that is not only free of charge, but can help free the minds and the hearts of our teachers and students. See, they have to do 5 major changes for institutional change. The first is provide better learning standards. Our learning standards leave a really big gap for teaching in deficit, sometimes racist, boring, disengaging ways.
Yeah.
Now, I started rewriting the learning standards, the Common Core standards, years ago, so I know how beautiful they have the potential to be. The second thing we must change is the criteria for adopting textbooks and curriculum in our schools. We must hold publishing companies accountable. I work in the largest urban districts across the nation who spend money, millions of dollars, on the widest curriculum. The third thing that we have, and that's something as an institution at a state or district level that you all can do today. You can stop giving the money and they'll start changing by providing better curriculum to you. The third thing is state assessments. My students and I, we study the state assessments, the tests. I mean, Brian, we study it at a level where we look at names, how much Kate is used. Gholnecsar is never used, right? Latasha is never used in the passages. Yeah. Even something like that, our names are not even in those same tests that's only testing the skills. But because we only screen in skills, that's largely problematic. You test the things you value identity, you assess identity. The fourth thing is teacher evaluation. Most of us use Danielson's model that was never designed to even assess teacher evaluation, or it wasn't even designed for equity and culturally responsiveness and anti-racism. We need better evaluations for teachers. And then finally, we need better teacher education programs where folks like y'all could go to the local universities and say, we are not hiring your teachers anymore until you teach them this, until you prepare them on equity and anti-racism and how to write a lesson plan. So many teachers don't know how to write lesson plans. That's why they teach the janky curriculum, because they don't know how to do it better. Yes. And so school leaders, school-based leaders, can hire differently as different interview questions. They can recruit teachers differently. They can reframe their staff meetings to make sure that you're cultivating and unearthing genius and joy, where you're pushing these 5 ideals. Teachers can write tomorrow. They can refine curriculum using these 5 pursuits. School support staff can do create spaces like through read alouds and projects and learning, and through song and music and multimodal text, where these 5 pursuits can be cultivated again and again and again. So I like to make it very clear. There are some systemic and structural changes that are needed, but at the same time, while we're waiting, we can do some changes directly in our schools and classrooms.
Absolutely. So thank you. Those 5 things: standards, textbook adoption, looking at our state assessments, how we evaluate teachers, and also teacher education programs and building capacity. That's definitely one of those things that we are within my team are trying to address within our local school district. You know, one of the things that you said that really resonates hard with me is some of our teachers not being able to develop an adequate lesson plan. And part of that comes from just a system that creates like subscriptions or subscribe lesson plans or scripts for teachers. And within those scripts, there is no existence of us. There's no pedagogy. There's no approach. There's no acknowledgement within us. And those teachers are forced or trained or conditioned to follow that. And that's not going to discount all of our educators, because we have some amazing ones. We have some that we need to support a lot better. Just like, you're saying that we don't want to really necessarily, when we talk about the deficiency within our students, is that we don't want to always attack, we don't ever want to attack the student, but we need to look at the deficiencies within the system. And that kind of goes across for educators as well. So absolute great point. And I actually answered question 1 and 2 with that one. So thank you for that. So the last question, sister, in education, right? There's a lot of talk and discussion. And right now in education, especially now, there's a lot of buzzwords in education: culturally responsive, culturally relevant, multiculturalism, diversity, equity, anti-racism, and all of these terms that are used. And sometimes I hear these terms, and it seems like some of these spaces in education, they're not even using them in right context. They don't even really know what it means, and they have a whole initiative for the entire district built around equity without a real definition of equity. And sometimes within that, specific groups of students and people get lost in that. So based on history and also our current state, why is it important to specifically address the needs of Black children specifically, opposed to using language of all within these discussions?
The simple answer is because Black children deserve our specificity. When you think about it, when you haven't given educational, health-related educational reparations after taking a group of people. We should feel shameful as a country when you haven't given people certain things. You know, like at the bare minimum, Brian, I say sometimes, why not give Black children a curriculum as reparation? See themselves in, you know, and so because we have generational trauma and abuse and oppression, because we're still being killed for the color of our skin.
Yes.
Like, it is inhumane to say that they don't deserve our specificity. And I would say that about any group of people, even those that did not look like me. I think students with IEPs deserve our specificity.
Yes.
But if we had an all lives matter curriculum and educational system, no one would ever say things like Black Lives Matter. They would never have a need to say it. So people are so concerned with the rhetoric instead of saying, well, why would a group of people need to say this? What have we done as a nation to create this trauma and pain and oppression? You know, and this is where we must see, you know, in my book, I use poetry from a Persian poet, and I'm half Persian, and this poem was given to me by my father, and it was written in 1258. And he says in this poem, 1258, the year, that long ago, he says in this poem that the human race is like one body. And when one body is afflicted with oppression and pain, one limb in your body is afflicted with oppression and pain. And he says, and you don't feel anything and you sleep well at night, you don't deserve to be called human. See, if all lives really matter, Black lives would be your arm. And if your arm was hurting, if your arm was in pain, you would feel your arm if it was broken in your whole body. If something happened to your arm, somebody stabbed it or something, your body would feel pain, but we're not doing that. We're not looking at humanity as the whole body. And so we're saying, well, they're feeling bad. That's not my arm. That limb is not a part of my body. And that's the problem with people's hearts and humanity. I don't care who you are. If you are women, immigrants, anybody who have historically or currently been treated unfairly, been marginalized, been underserved, we must show up as a human race. And so because we're not, and because we never have as a whole, this is simply why Black people deserve our specificity. And when you study Blackness, as I make the point in my book, this is the group of people you want to learn and build from. It's through our models as Black people that will help white children be better, that will help Asian students be better. It's through Blackness that will save our world. And I've always felt that. And I've heard the same thing from different scholars. It is through our models, because what group of people have survived and thrived after chattel slavery, that have higher learning goals than we have in the Common Core standards? What group of people who have been about the liberation of everybody? I don't care what part of history you study. Black people say, you struggling, we gonna help you too. You struggling, we march with everybody.
Collectivism.
Yeah, that's the group of people that we want to learn from. So of course they deserve our specificity.
Absolutely. Hey, you articulate, that's mic drop right there. You know, when you said that, and one of the things that I've said in various presentations that I've done apart from this is that we need to stop as a human family, stop looking at each other as allies. Like, that's the language. Like, you need an ally. Like, I need family. I need relatives.
Yeah,
ally comes
part of my body.
Exactly. Yeah. Ally comes with stipulations, right? And stipulations and agreements have conditions to them. But I need you to be family where you love me and you care for me and you foster me and you are you're going to fight for me under any condition. Yeah. And it's extremely important that we identify that. But I think part of it, and that we need to go back historically, is look at the roots and the introduction of Black people into this country, that our humanity has never been affirmed and validated. So therefore, you can't see me as family. You can't see me as part of the same human family as yours, because that has not yet been identified within our country. That has not been identified within our curriculum yet. And we need to get to the point that we not just infuse these aspects, because I want to get away from the language of infusion, but we need to get to a point of transformation that we can start to see our very humanity within our curriculum for our students can see themselves and feel and tap into that natural power. And also that same student who can be of another race or who doesn't look like me can understand and value my humanity so we can move forward and build a more just society. So Dr. Muhammad, thank you so much for joining us. You have definitely brought immense value. I don't even know if value is the word that I can put on that as far as the stuff that you drop. I was sitting here watching you and just trying to take notes. And I said, you know, I'm not kind of watch the recording later on and kind of catch things because, you know, the book, again, everybody, this is extremely valuable. I've already, you know, read it and I've taken all kinds of notes and I got quotes and stuff like that. Matter of fact, I'm doing a presentation this later afternoon. I'm using a quote directly from you, from this book. It's a lot of stuff in this Cultivating Genius and just really shifting this narrative, understanding that our Black children are beautiful, brilliant, and amazing and genius, and the skills that you're trying to embed with them, they already have it. It just needs to be drawn out of them. As the word even educator means, is to draw forth from. And draw those skills out of our students where they can be proficient. One of the things that you said also, Dr. Muhammad, is, you know, we look at, you know, our children operate in 20% efficiency, but we're not even operating in the system beyond just the parameters of 20% proficiency because we don't even see the humanity in the children that we're here to serve and support. So thank you again. Any closing words, anything that you would like to see, you know, say to our audience, our participants before we route out?
No, you said it. The word is transformation. And to get there, we need collaboration. We need community. We need each other. We need this village to grow stronger toward so that no one is, you know, devalued in our system. And so, you know, that's the word that will stick with me is this idea of a village and transformation. And we need each other more than ever in this work. So thank you.
Thank you. All right, thank you. I appreciate it. And thank you all, everybody who's tuned in, who participated. Again, the 27th Annual African American and Caribbean Studies Summer Institute. We're talking about the marathon towards educational transformation or reimagining education. We need to reimagine education where we center the lives and perspectives of Black students. Thank you. Peace and love.